I hit the sync button on accident. Sorry. Hey guys, should we try to restart it?
I got a recording. We're
This
great.
is all planned.
Sermon illustration. I know.
Yes, turn it off.
Turn it off, turn it back on.
All right, my bad.
It's okay.
Check. Yep. Nope. Nope. Nope.
Come on,
Do I need to
check this.
Green light on?
Green light's on.
It's on.
It's a tradition. Yeah, it wouldn't feel like a Sunday
Right,
without
see
it.
that.
Yeah.
All right.
Sorry, we got you. So when I say I checked it, like, I promise you, like.
It's all good. We're gonna roll with it. All right. Dave, just to make sure this is on too, we're good?
Yeah.
All right. Well, hello everyone. Yeah, my name is Cody. I'm gonna try really hard not to trip over this cord. And yeah, it's always such a joy whenever I get to share with you all. I just genuinely love this place. So, yeah. So let's keep going. So for the last several weeks, we've been talking about the Beatitudes in sort of like granular detail, like line by line. What does this mean for us? What did it mean then? How do we make sense of all of this today? And so, even as like a conclusion to this whole long-running theme that we've been exploring in the Beatitudes, the thought was maybe zoom out a bit, like 30,000-foot view. What do these things seem to have in common? And yeah, are there any things that we can grab from this? So I'm going to be very direct. This morning, I'm going to talk about faith. That's it. We're going to talk about faith. What is it that you believe about God? What is it that you believe God believes about you? And that's kind of where we're headed. And so to do that, I want to start with a little imaginative prayer exercise. Okay? So kind of as we begin and kind of get ready for this, we're going to prepare ourselves. So first, maybe just get in the most comfortable. I'm not going to tell you how to sit, but just try to get in the most comfortable kind of posture that you can. Perhaps be on the floor, perhaps not, whatever you want to do. And then begin by taking some deep breaths, if you would. But like slow and deep, like from your gut. Okay? Not from the chest, but lower and deeper. And you can close your eyes if you'd like. And maybe do like a body scan. Where are you carrying around the tension and stress and the anxiety from your week this week? Where have you, in the rush to just get here and now you're here, can you be here? Like body, mind, heart. Can you be here? That's the invitation. So where are you carrying that around? Where do you feel tense? Where do you feel tight? Can you begin and try to relax that? Okay. When I ask you, or kind of give you the prompt, when you imagine God, what comes to mind? So you can kind of begin there. And as you're imagining God, can you imagine God imagining you? How does God feel towards you? What does God say to you? And this is where I'm going to cheat a little bit, okay? So I'm going to kind of nudge us in a certain direction. If any of those thoughts or feelings is shame or anger or fear, kind of in that vicinity, I'm gonna ask you to maybe to shift it a little, okay? Who was the first person for you, kind of in your life, in your earliest memories, that when you were in their presence, you felt loved, you felt joy, you felt hope, you felt like you could just be yourself, and they delighted in you and accepted you as you were. And truthfully, you didn't really even have to think that much about being yourself because it just came so naturally in their presence. So it's sort of like a choose your own adventure meditation this morning. Imagining God, imagining you, but if those should lead us down the direction of shame and fear, we're going to pivot to what was the earliest person for you that you just felt loved and cared for. I'm going to give this a minute. Encourage you to just kind of be here for a moment in that place and see what happens. So I'm going to bring this back. You're invited to take a big, deep, slow breath, the biggest and deepest one yet. If you have your eyes closed, you can open your eyes. And we're going to get back to the Beatitudes. So the Beatitudes, when Jesus came and was kind of came onto the scene, teaching, preaching, serving, there were two prevailing worldviews at the time, and both of the Roman Empire and then the culture of Judaism that he came from. The first one was sort of like the Hellenistic religion of the day in Rome, basically said where you were born, there you stayed. You were born, the class that you were born into, that revealed the favor that the gods looked down upon you with or not. And that was it. Okay, there wasn't a whole lot of upward mobility. You were just there. And for most of the people, it wasn't in one of the upper classes. So they just had this inherent belief that the gods had frowned upon them from birth. That was the first one. The second one in Judaism was the reason we're in this plight that we're in, the reason Rome has conquered us, the reason we don't have a land to call home, the reason there's so much suffering, we don't have resources, we're being taxed so hard, is because we have not been holy enough. And God is, in essence, punishing us. So those were the two. It was where you're born is where you stayed, or we have just not been holy enough. But both of those, as you can see, are not very uplifting, are they? They're not really like, oh, now we can go and do this and be the most we can be. There wasn't really any room for that. And it was into this scene that Jesus comes preaching and sharing the message of the Beatitudes. It says, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Actually, can I get that slide? Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those who are persecuted. And here's the thing. These weren't like things to aspire to. You know what I mean? There was a spirit of abandonment and defeat to the people he was preaching to. And in essence, he was coming in to say, those things you didn't think that you have, all those ways that you thought God felt about you, that's not true. In fact, you are already blessed right where you are right now, right in the midst of your pain and suffering. And then he gave them a choice. Like, you can choose then. I'm inviting you into this belief system. I'm inviting you into this way of faith, to believe these things about reality. Those things that you've been taught to believe about reality are not true. I am telling you what's true. Do you want to come with me? Are you going to come and follow me? And I will show you what this looks like to live this faith out. This is kind of how it looks like a little bit. Can I get the next slide? So, like, what we believe about ourselves is deeply influenced by the we. What I believe about me is deeply influenced by we, which is our communities, the spheres of influence we find ourselves in, whether that's our church community, our families of origin, kind of the prevailing worldview and political narrative of our culture. But then that's kind of all held by the story. What is the story that you think, like the overarching prevailing truth about reality. I know that's a big question for like a Sunday morning. What do you believe about like ultimate reality? We're going to try to kind of get into that a little bit and see if we can make a little headway. And that's why we started with this imaginative prayer exercise this morning, because what do you believe about God and what do you believe about that God believes about you has about as much power to shape the course and the events of your life as anything, truthfully. So this is maybe another image. It kind of looks like this. They're kind of like Russian nesting dolls, you know, and then they just fit one within the other. I fit within, me fits within we, and it fits within the story. And hopefully, ideally, there's congruence in those things. So, curious, you know, just as a check-in as we keep going, what is the story that you believe about reality right now? Could you say it? And it's okay if you can't. It's a big question, I understand. But like, what is that? What is that for you? What does ultimate reality look like? What is the story that you are living in right now? So to explore this, I thought maybe let's start with some alternatives. Okay? How about this one? The story. Maybe we tell ourselves about parenthood sometimes. At least this is true for me. Is the second you buy something in bulk, your kids decide they don't like it anymore. You know how many Costco runs I've made? And it's like, yeah, I don't really like this. I have a box of oatmeal packets in my pantry that feels like they've been there for years. The story, I love this, the story of adulthood is, we tell ourselves, but after this week, things will finally start to slow down a little bit. And we tell ourselves over and over until we die. The story of being a Hoosier. The story we tell ourselves, we're the crossroads of America. Which is like we exist to kind of be driven through. Which is like, oh man, it's kind of lame. It's like, why couldn't we be Michigan, pure Michigan, right? That has got some like weight to it. Are there any West Virginians in the house? No one is from West Virginia? It's too bad, because theirs are my favorite. And here I'm going to try to say my best Miners voice. Mountaineers are always free. That's good, right? Mountaineers are always free. Then there are some more insidious ones, you know, that kind of latch on to us. Time is money. Bigger is better. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You know, and like when these are without really even saying it, when this is kind of the story we're living into, it shapes the trajectory of our life. It shapes how we treat people. It shapes how we spend our time and our money and how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about other people. It affects our mental, spiritual, emotional, mental health. It's all inclusive. The lie that the Beatitudes rejects, and can I get the next slide, was where there is suffering, we've been abandoned. That was the lie that the Beatitudes rejected. It's, you know, St. Francis said, where there is suffering, there is Christ. This is what Jesus came to teach and to share and to invite his people into. And there was very real suffering going on when he was sharing this message. Things were not okay. And to keep going with this, what might be another version of the story perhaps we're invited to believe in this morning? And I would say it's resurrection. It's like the story is that where there is suffering, there is Christ, and where there is Christ, there is resurrection. Like resurrection as the story being, it's like the very character of God. The very character of God is resurrection. So it wasn't necessarily, it's not something that happened 2,000 years ago. It happened, and it's happening right now in our very midst. And I kind of want to, like, as a template, show you what this looks like. Can I get the next slide? So on the left, there's this way to reality, kind of this arc to reality. And I'm curious, as I'm talking through this, where do you find yourself on this path of resurrection? So there was the cross, and this is where the pain and the suffering and the loss of life happens. And then there's the tomb. It's like, how do I make sense of this? This loss has happened, and now I'm just like, I am empty. I am stuck. I am low. I don't know. It just feels so dark, and I don't know where to go. I thought I was on a path, and now that path is gone, and I have no idea where I'm going. Any of you ever felt that way before? And then there's resurrection. There's new life that happens right here, kind of in the midst of this old, ordinary, broken, dark life. Something new emerges. A new job, a new relationship, new life, new children. Something that happened that we didn't think was going to happen. But here's the thing. The story's not over yet. It keeps going. And you remember Mary's very first reaction after resurrection. And they're in the garden. And Mary sees Jesus for the very first time. Do you know what she did? She held on to Jesus. She like death gripped Jesus. And you know what he said to her? He said, Mary, do not cling to me. Resurrection happened, and she's like, yes, now it can just go back to the way it used to be. That was her very first reaction to this new life unfolding before her. And then as this pattern goes, Jesus spent 40 days teaching and preaching what this new life was going to look like. In other words, they were learning to live into the new. The new thing had happened, but then there's a whole lot of learning that takes place after that, right? A new job, a new relationship, new parents. It happened. This miracle happened. This new thing happened, but we're still learning to live into what this newness means and how to do it. And then in time, as it goes, we have a new capacity to hold these things, to hold the pain and the suffering that would have one time broken us and maybe perhaps did. And now we have new strength and just a new capacity to hold both love and suffering simultaneously. So I'm curious, where has this happened for you before? Is this happening right now? Where do you kind of find yourself on this map? But what I hope that this reveals to you is wherever you find yourself, there is a trajectory to it, and that trajectory is towards love and towards hope and towards renewal and rebirth. Do you catch this? Like, this is important. This is really, really important. And when we believe this is the story that we believe and that we're living into, it is powerful, friends. It is empowering to us. Listen, I'm going to be honest, okay? So I wasn't going to say this, but I'm going to say this. I don't know if I would be a Christian if I didn't believe this. This is the one thing that has, in my opinion, the power to hold all of the pain and suffering of life and still come out hopeful on the other side. I don't know what else can hold it like that, but it's resurrection. And, friends, it's journey and it's work and it's sacred and holy work. Can I get the next slide? Because Richard Rohr says, the pain that we don't transform, we are going to transfer. The pain that we experience and that we don't allow to be transformed in our own life, we are inevitably going to pass it on. One way or another, who we are, we will pass it on. And that will be bitterness and resentment, or it will be love and hope and renewal. I don't know if you've ever had any conversations that have gone like this, maybe with your kids, or if you work with kids or volunteer with kids. You ever have something that goes like this? Hey, how's your day go? Like, it was fine. It was good. What'd you do? Nothing. Like, okay. Like, I've had a lot of those conversations. Occasionally, sometimes I'll get, well, what did you do? And I'll say something and like, oh, okay. But then like to really see if they're listening, it's like, well, this kind of not awesome thing happened. And then it's like, well, then what happened? And then it's like, and then like, this thing kind of made me angry today. Oh, wait, what did you do next? And it's weird, it's a paradox. It's like we think kind of going into this territory and being honest about some of these things with children is gonna like overwhelm them or kind of break them, their brittleness. And it sort of does the opposite. There's some really good research out of Fuller Institute. We've referenced this research a number of times, but it basically said, and this was done over a number of years with thousands of students, that roughly at the time it was about 50% of households that grew up like in the Christian faith, roughly 50% of those children when they left the home sort of left faith. Eventually about 50% of the 50% that left ended up coming back. But they wanted to figure out like what were some of the common themes that were present in some of the households where the children, as they left, they kind of continued on this trajectory of faith. There was like 3 or 4, but one of the big findings was this: households that were the parents who were honest about their struggle, who are honest about the obstacles they face, and honest about the difficult emotion they experience, and honest about their doubts about God sometimes, was the one that meant a lot to their children. And it was the paradox that's counterintuitive, because expressing the doubts didn't push their children away, it brought them closer in. So that when they left home and inevitably experienced some of those things on their own, it's like, oh, I'm in good company. We've talked about this before. My parents have shared, they've been through this too. I'm not alone, right? And that's like the biggest lie. And this is what, the Beatitudes push up against is when there's pain and suffering, I've been abandoned, I'm alone. And you're never alone. And that was the message of Jesus. You're never alone, and we're going someplace good. I've had a number of mentors. I don't know if this is true for any of you, but a number of my mentors, kind of over the years, it's funny, I was thinking about this week, especially in light of our current political climate. I'm like, I wonder what would happen if all these people I really cared about had made a really big impact on my life. We put them all in the same room, and I started asking them questions about politics and who are you voting for, and honestly, we get a lot of different answers. But the one thing they all have in common, and I felt this and experienced this from them, was that in moments of pain and suffering, they opened themselves up to it. Almost like, I imagine it being like the posture of Jesus on the cross, right? There is this openness. And that's painful, because that openness allows the pain to come in, where we can't be guarded. But it's also what allows the joy and hope and grace and love and peace to come in too. And I don't know about you, but I haven't experienced a life yet where you can have one without the other. So here's a couple of stories about how this kind of works out in real life. This power of resurrection, like the story that we're living into. Where there is suffering, there is Christ, and where there is Christ, there is resurrection. I have a friend who's a counselor, and several years ago, he very tragically lost one of the children. And it was brutal. I mean, it's brutal, as you can imagine. There was just nothing, it was just never had any words to say that felt like he could do anything. But as the years went on, recently I was talking to him, he said, I was working with a family, and it kind of came to me, and they had lost a child. And I was able to share with them a little bit about my story of losing a child. And just my presence in knowing that they knew that I felt how they felt, that in itself brought them a moment of peace. And I hate that happened, and that was like a holy, sacred moment. And I was grateful that I could be there with them in that and empathize with them in that way. You see, it's like there's loss and suffering, and there's new life and hope and resurrection simultaneously. That's the story we're being invited to live into. Can I get the next slide? This is a letter my Grandpa King, wrote my grandma September 1st, 1944. It was written from France shortly before his infantry unit fought in the Battle of the Bulge. And for those of you who are not World War II historians, this was like the last major battle of the war. It's when Hitler's forces tried to make one last desperate attempt to beat the Allied forces, and thankfully the Allied forces won. But in this war, it was like a brutal winter. It was fought over several months where they were just like in bunkers covered in snow, and it was freezing, and they'd fight, and then they'd wait, and they'd fight, and then they'd wait. For months, this happened. So you can imagine what that will do to a person's soul, being in that place, cold, freezing, lonely. Thankfully, he made it out alive. And later that spring, his unit went in and liberated one of the concentration camps in southern Germany. He returned home from the war and never talked about it as is usual. And then years later, though, I heard stories from my grandpa about how it affected him. She said there would be moments that, like when thunderstorms would pass over, she would find him under the bed, like curled up in the fetal position, and he was asleep, but he thought that thunder were the bombs being dropped, and it was just the PTSD of it on autopilot. He just went into protection. He passed away when I was 7. And I remember we were going through his belongings. This is kind of when we found the letter. I had this saved on my phone. I didn't read it till many years later. But we were going through his belongings, and one of the other things that caught my attention was he had this envelope full of pictures. And one of the pictures, I was like, Grandma, what is this? She told me, these were bodies of the men, women, and children from the concentration camp, just in a pile. And it was horrific what humans could do to other humans. And yet, I never knew those stories about him. But what I remember about him was how we would just goof around on his farm, how he would play catch and run the bases with me, how I'd ride his tractor with him. At one time we were fixing a pipe, and we got our faces right up to it, and the pipe burst and it sprayed us in the face, and we thought that was like the most hilarious thing that had ever happened. I would love to go in and watch him shave, and to this day I can remember how it smells. He would use Barbasol, and I use Barbasol now too, because I just love how that smells. It takes me back. But when I would go in and I'm watching him shave, he would take the shaving foam and put it on my nose. And I just thought that was the greatest thing ever. In the imaginative prayer exercise we did in the beginning this morning, he was the person I was thinking of. Like that person, like when I was in his presence, I just felt safe and accepted and loved. And I knew that he delighted in me, and I felt that. And I continue to feel it to this day. The spirit of that lives on even after he's gone. How is it, friends, that a person who experienced so much pain and suffering, the worst that you can imagine, that humans can do to another human, and you're right there, and yet is still able to generate love energy and grace energy and peace energy? How does that happen? That is a miracle. That is the story of our faith that we are being asked and invited to believe in. I'll also, as a confession, I read this letter recently. It's like 6 pages long, And, he writes in cursive, which is really annoying because I don't know how to read that very well. It looks beautiful, but it's really hard to read. But I confess, I was a little disappointed when I read it. Because, I'm going to read this letter that my grandfather, right on the precipice of these historic wars. And I'm going to learn, some profound wisdom. This is going to be a story of him slaying dragons. And he's mostly just telling my grandma how beautiful the mountains are in France. And he had an omelet one time made by this French person, and it was the greatest omelet he'd ever tasted. It was very rare that they'd get hot meals. And this one even had chopped bacon and fried potatoes in it. But the more I sat with this, the more I realized, no, this is actually deeply profound. And this moment of great hardship and suffering, he was savoring the most ordinary parts of life, allowing those things to fill his heart with gratitude, and then took that gratitude into that darkness. That's powerful. One of the ways that this happens, that this transformative process happens, wherever you're at in the stage of this journey, the cross, the tomb, the resurrection, the 40 days after it, wherever you find yourself, love is the energy we draw on to keep going. Okay? But it's not so much our ability to love as it is our ability to receive love. And this is important because one of the ways that we receive love is so simple, but we just express gratitude and we savor the things in our life that we're grateful for. And in the process of doing it, it's kind of like a river that we're in and we're being carried. And there are moments in life where we're trying really hard to swim upstream. Yeah? But it's like a river that's carrying us and we just relax into it. And that's really not an encouraging thing if you're going through something really hard and you're being asked, hey, can you just kind of relax into it? But we can if we have the faith that we're being carried somewhere good through this. One of the ways that we can kind of keep recharging our love batteries, if you will, is to just express gratitude about the most ordinary things of our life. So I thought to end today we would do that together. What, my friends, do you find just the most ordinary parts of life, the simple, seemingly mundane things? You're like, you know what? This morning, I'm really grateful for that. What might that look like? And I'll start putting on a brand new pair of socks. I love how that feels on my feet. I'll do one more just to get us rolling. Brand new windshield wipers. What is it for you?
New York style pizza.
Right, that's it.
Strong cup of coffee.
Pizza and coffee.
Watching sunrise from my desk.
Mm. That's-
Getting my daughter out of the crib.
Mm.
Dave patted me on the shoulder when he walked past me.
Driving my kids to school.
Mm.
Walking the dog.
Hearing parents say I love you when they drop their kids off.
This is great. I'm already feeling emotional. You guys just saying these things, you know? Man. What else? What else? Let's do a few more. This is good.
Circus tent of leaves this time of year.
Hot water.
Oh my God.
All the blue skies we've had lately.
So friends, this is it. This is the practice of our faith working itself out in practice. This giant ultimate reality, where there is Christ, there is suffering. Where there is suffering, there is Christ. And where there is Christ, there is resurrection, is energized by the daily, ordinary, mundane expressions of gratitude. And it's how we receive. We're being invited to receive this really big and powerful and giant love that Christ is pouring out on us. So, we're going to be invited to take communion. Every week we celebrate this ancient act. Do we remember on the night Jesus was betrayed, he took bread and said, "This is my body broken for you." And we've had all sorts of fun technical difficulties this morning. But it's life, it's life, and it's good, and it's holy. And he took the wine and he said, "This is my blood shed for you. Do this in remembrance of me," remembering that I love you. In the midst of your darkest moments, you're never alone. And we're going somewhere really, really good together.